In the previous chapter, David was observing the fact and was deeply distressed by the reality that he was surrounded by people whose lips were full of falsehood, whether flattering or lies. And so, in response to these people, he cried out, "Help, Lord." His response to seeing so much sin was firstly to cry out to God, to pray, and then to trust in the flawless, perfect, pure words of God. Now, Psalm 13 opens with a similar cry. It opens with, "How long, Lord?" And those three words really capture so much of the sentiment of this particular psalm. This is one of the shorter psalms in the book with just 6 verses, but it takes us on a pretty remarkable spiritual journey from the depths of despair to the heights of godly hope. Just compare the starting point to where it all ends, and you will see that David is allowing himself to be moved by God here. Sometimes we can kind of dig our heels in. We can become reluctant to respond to God, reluctant to lift our eyes or to speak out our sorrows to him. In those cases, it shouldn't surprise us that we will spend longer feeling downcast than we otherwise would need to. And so let's follow David's steps, shall we, as he walks out of this spiritual valley. "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me?" There's a real intensity in this Psalm of David, isn't there? For most people watching this video, this will sound like a sad psalm. But for some, this is exactly the cry of your heart. David is not having a bad day. David is suffering in what seems like a kind of spiritual depression. Charles Spurgeon was extraordinarily gifted and blessed by God, and yet he struggled with exactly this sort of suffering. He said, "I have suffered many times from severe sickness and frightful mental depression, seeking almost to despair. Almost every year I've been laid aside for a season, for flesh and blood cannot bear the strain, at least such flesh and blood as mine." David feels abandoned by God, like things will never change. "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever?" Implied there is that God has forgotten him. And David wonders, will it go on like this forever, or will you remember me again, God? "How long will you hide your face from me?" David says. It's not just that his relationship with God is rocky, his understanding his relationship with himself is rocky as well. "How long must I wrestle with my thoughts?" There is internal torment in his mind and in his heart. There is no peace for David. Out there are enemies saying, "I have overcome him," and his foes rejoice whenever he falls. And internally, he is in torment, unable to find relief. We're perhaps so familiar with the Psalms that we don't find these writings as radical as we ought to. There is something utterly amazing about the king, or at least the anointed king, being this extraordinarily vulnerable. He doesn't say, "I'm having a hard day, but I'll muscle through it." He doesn't say, "Well, it's time for me to keep calm and carry on even though things are going badly." He says, "Those people hate me, and there is no peace within me, and God seems to have abandoned me, and how long will this last?" David, in all of his despair, does the right thing. He talks to God, and there is no better place to turn. He opened by saying, "God's face is turned away from me." In verse 3, he says, "Look on me and answer, Lord my God." He wants the face of God to be turned back towards him. He wants the living God to listen to him. In fact, he doesn't just call him God generally, but Lord, as in, "I will submit to you. You are Yahweh, the covenant God of Israel. You are the ruler of my life. You are Lord, and you are my God," he says, despite the sorrow. In all of his despair, he cries out to God. Well, the psalm takes a dramatic turn in verse 5. "But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me." You know, what's fascinating about this is that, as far as we know, nothing has changed in David's circumstances. There's no indication that God has suddenly spoken to him as he wanted. It doesn't seem that his enemies have suddenly disappeared, and he may well still wrestle with his own thoughts. This is not the happily ever after. This is simply a resolute decision to trust in the goodness of God based on his character and what he has done. He has been good to me, David says. This is a stunning picture of trusting in God. Faith is not the absence of struggle or difficulty. Faith is the choice to hold on to what we know to be true about God, even if our foes and our feelings are trying to tell us differently. And so, whether this is just an interesting psalm to you or the cry of your heart today, whether you are struggling or in a similar situation, may God lift you from despair and enable you to see what he is doing, that he is good and his love endures forever, and we can rejoice in his salvation because he has been good to us.